Alright, to get started for this exercise, we need to set up an InDesign document that has 3 different page sizes and orientations within the same document. To do this, I've launched InDesign. Let's go to File and create a new document. And your setup may be slightly different, but the results will be the same. We want the page size to start off being 11 by 17. The page numbers, we're going to work with 3 of them. And let's uncheck facing pages. We're going to set our margins to be 0 inches on all sides. And let's also give it a bleed of 1/8 of an inch all the way around. So 0.125 on the top, bottom, left, and right. When we say OK, you can see with our document setup, we now have 3 pages that are all the same size. So let's make each one of them slightly different. I'm going to open up my Pages panel. And let's pull it down to where we can see our master page. The A master page is always going to be the default size that you initially start off with, and we're going to keep it this size. But to rename it, click on the A master, and then we can open up the options for A master, and let's give it the name that's the size of the document. In this case, it'll be 11 by 17. We'll say OK. To make a new, different page size, we'll go back up to the top options for the Pages panel, create a new master. In this master, we'll keep the prefix B, but this size is going to be a 10 by 10. So 10 by 10, and the width of it will be, of course, 10 inches by, 10 inches, not 1 inches, 10 inches by 10 inches. We'll say OK. Notice now I've got a second master page, and let's do the same thing for the third page. This will be a C master, and this one's going to be a 15 by 10. The width for this one will be 15 inches, and the height will be 10 inches. We'll say OK to that. So, in looking at our master pages, we've got a vertical, a square, and also a horizontal or a landscape mode document. To apply these to our pages, you simply click on your master page and drag it to that page setting. It'll give you a warning saying, hey, you've got 2 different page sizes. Which size do you really want to use? We're going to use the master page size. And notice that will change the size of that document or that page on the document. Do the same thing for the C. Apply that to the third page, and it will change up for that one. Now you can double click on the regular pages and go back into the mode. And you can see how we've got 3 different page sizes all within our same document. The next step is to set up our guidelines for each of the pages. In each of the guidelines, I want them to be slightly different just to give you an experience of what it would be like doing a layout with different guides. I've got page 1 selected, and do make sure that page is selected. If you have another one selected, and even though you're looking at page 1, the results won't show up on the right page. So with page 1, we're going to go up to Layout, choose Create Guides, and this will allow us to create a grid of guides along our document layout. And you can do it through rows and columns. By default, since we don't have any margins, we're going to keep everything at just the page. Also know, if you have to redo this and you want to remove your existing pages, you can check removing existing ruler guides. But since we don't have any, we're not going to worry too much about that. For this first page, we're going to set our number of rows to 12 and our number of columns to 8. And if we turn on preview, you get an idea of what this looks like. And we'll set our gutter for both of these to be a 1/16 of an inch, so 0.625. Very, very thin, but you can see the amount of space that's between each one of those. And this will give you a good square grid with a minor gutter in between everything. We'll say OK to that. Now let's scroll down to page 2. Make sure page 2 is also selected in your Pages panel. Go back up to Layout. Let's create guides for page 2. This one's going to have 8 rows and 15 columns. And we're going to set a gutter of 0 for this page. So these will just be straight lines that we're working with. We'll say OK to this. In this case, you can see even though it's a square page, our guides give us a tall rectilinear shape. And then finally on page 3, our larger rectangular page, we'll go to Layout and create guides for this one. The rows will be 10, the gutter of 0, and the columns will be 15 with a gutter of 1/8 of an inch. And we'll say OK to that. So the main purpose of showing you to create these guides is that you can get a lot of different grid guide layouts, and these can affect the way that you lay out the information on your page. The next step for this project is to import all of our information onto the page and to play around with the placement of it based on the guides that we have. To get started on the layout for this design, you're going to download a folder that has information for a Harley-Davidson motorcycle. Now, just so you know, the entire class has 4 different folders, and you're only going to be responsible for one of the particular types of motorcycles. So you don't have to do 4, just the one that you download is all that you have to create. In my case, I'm going to work on the Softail Deluxe motorcycle. When you open up the folder, inside of it, pay attention to the images and information I'm giving you. I've got the logo in both the color and black and white, and you need to use the logo in some fashion on each of the ads, though it doesn't have to be both of them. I'm giving you some supporting images, and these are kind of lifestyle images that can help to bolster the overall appeal of your design. You can use these images any way you see fit. You can change the colors on them, crop them, rearrange them, and composite them however you want to fit your ad. But they do need to be used some way, in some fashion, for your layout. I'm giving you a text file that has all of the information that should be on your ad. You've got the name of the motorcycle, you've got a little tagline, you've got the starting price and some performance information, and then you've got a brief little write-up about it. When you think about the overall layout, also think about what should be Papa Bear, Mama Bear, Baby Bear information. What should be most important down to least important as far as emphasis and hierarchy. Definitely the name of it and maybe even the price should stand out pretty well. But the rest of the information, is that really important? Does it need to be played up as much as the other information? So think about the weight of your information as well as the pictures that you're using. The final image is of the product itself, and this definitely needs to feature prominently on your advertisements. So in some way, make sure the product is well represented on your overall layout. To get started, I've gone into InDesign and I've opened up the text file. I've copied all of the text and I've placed them in their own separate text boxes in InDesign. The reason why I did it in separate text boxes is because it gives me more freedom to move things around inside of my overall layout. And I've also taken each of the images and I've placed them in their own image file or image box off to the side of my document. Even though I may not use all of these images, just having everything on the page gives me an idea of the amount of information that I have, and I can quickly pick and choose as it's needed. It's kind of like putting all the puzzle pieces to a puzzle onto the table. Once you know where everything is, it's a little bit easier to lay it out. Okay, so let's jump in and actually play around with the overall design. I would always start off with using the text first. The reason why is because the text is the most important thing, and if it looks good in text, then adding the pictures is just going to bolster your overall appeal. What I'm asking you to do is to use your grid layout. Don't just place the images on here willy-nilly. Actually use the grid as a structure for how to place and align all of your information. So we'll start off with the Softail Deluxe. In my opinion, I think this needs to be a Papa Bear kind of feature. So I'm going to keep everything inside of this particular grid layout as I choose my fonts, placement, and layout. I think the starting price needs to feature a little bit more prominently, so I'll give it maybe 3 different grids. We've got performance, and then finally we've got the little write-up blurb, and that can take up a lot of room, but we'll keep it nice and small down below. When using this grid, don't think that you have to be so constrained that everything must fit nice and neatly inside of here. Think about margins and borders, and also think about ways that you can work inside of the gridded area. As I show you my examples, you'll get a little bit better understanding for this. I'm going to pause the video, do a layout, and then talk about how I did this layout and some design choices that I created. Alright, so for my examples, I'm going to show you a variety of ways I've used the grid to do this layout. Keep in mind, you don't have to use all of the images, but you do need to use all of the text, and you do need to incorporate the logo and the main product image some way in your design. I did choose some type styles, and I kept those type styles consistent just to make it easy. Usually I choose one nice display type and then some sort of body copy type that will give me a good layout for the mama bear and baby bear kind of stuff. So for this first one, if I go back out of preview mode, you can still see my grid, and you can see how I've used the grid just to give me different sections to work in for this layout. For instance, the top, since I wanted this image to be very Papa Bear, to stand out, I let it take up the majority of the area, and I've used the grid to stop it right there along that line. Also, since this grid has some nice 1/16 of an inch spacing to it, I've used that to space out all of my images and the different boxes on here to give it that little bit of distance. One thing I didn't do in these layouts is have all of my text and all of my images always line up to the edges of these margins. The grid is simply there as a guideline, but once you turn off the grid and actually look at your layout, you want to nudge things around and move it around. So you'll see that I'm not using everything fitting exactly inside the grid. I'm just using that as a starting point to place all of my objects inside of here. So for instance, you can see Softail Deluxe fits inside of this black area that's inside of these 3 by roughly 7 area of text. Even my logo fits within this area, and since that 3 spaces wide fits, I use those 3 spaces wide to place the image or the picture down below. And zoom back out. So this is one particular option. I made a copy of it just to show you another way you can lay it out. So this one, again, emphasizes that grid, and it also emphasizes some of the spacing in between it. You can see for the text for Softail Deluxe, I wanted this to be very Papa Bear and to take up a lot of room. So I used this 2 by 7 area, and then my main product images takes up a lot more. Everything else is baby and mama bear down here at the bottom. For my third option, for this one, I just let an image be the background color, and I chose to fill it in, and then I used my guidelines to give me an area to place all of my stuff. In this case, I divided it in half, and I used this one guide as my guideline to place and align all of my text inside of here. The grids are simply there as a starting point to take away some of the confusion about where to place things and how big they should be. Once you got everything placed, then you can start nudging things around, but definitely go back to them to make sure everything is nice and lined up. The final one is a little bit more concept driven, so in this case, all of my images, some of them are overlapping and some of them follow the grid, but other times they'll break the structure of it. But my text, you can see, is following along this particular grid line. Everything is nice and flush to this. I use this grid line to center up this text inside of my object. Play around with the placement of your text. Text can go on top of pictures. Things can go behind it. In this case, I used a line to emphasize my grid and kind of play on the overlapping appeal of my images. Some other things to think about are the colors that you're using. So to get these color schemes, I used my color theme picker. Choose an image, and you know when it does this, it'll give you a variety of options to choose from, and you can add those to your color palette. So you can see how I use the same roughly 5 colors in everything that I had. Play around with blending modes and how the objects and images blend with each other. You can see how here I've used I've changed the opacity of it to give it either a multiplied or a screened overlay that works with those colors. With up here, I'm giving it a drop shadow, or I'm allowing it to gradiate in from one picture to another picture. All of this kind of goes in to add further refined details, but it all starts with the basic grid structure, and you can see that grid structure now once I turn it on for this one. So I've given you options that you can use for this first one. I want you to continue on, and for the next 2 pages, use that grid structure to place your information in there and build out a design for each one of these. You only have to do 3. I'm just giving you 4 for the first one to do. And when you're finished, I want you to save this as a packaged InDesign file and upload it to Moodle for grading.